Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from beautiful Irvine, California. Happy to have you with us today. And we're going to have a special guest on our show today, my longtime friend, and Richard. Welcome back to the show. Richard Battle, author, coming from the great state of Texas. Happy to have you with me today, Richard.
Good afternoon, Mark. Thank you so much for having us back with you.
I do want to start off with a word from our sponsor. If you believe, like a lot of us out there, that the dollar's falling apart because this government has over-leveraged itself, and you have no faith in the stock market, and you don't even believe in cryptocurrency, no surprise there, what should you invest your money in? Well, gold, of course. Gold's been around for over 1,000 years. It's always been the original currency out there. But if you don't want a tub of gold in your backyard, and who would, but what can you do? You need to call Genesis Gold Group and set up a gold-backed IRA. The dollar may collapse, the stock market may collapse, but gold has never gone to zero. Call Genesis Gold Group right now. Learn about rolling over your risky stock-backed IRA into a gold-backed IRA, and they will even give you $10,000 in free silver if you qualify. Call right now, 800-594-9698. That's 800-594-9698. Now, Richard, coming from the great state of Texas, and with us broadcasting here in California, and this great country that we're all a part of, Richard, we are going through an unprecedented situation here where our former president is literally in a courtroom today to enter a plea to federally charged crimes. Richard, give me your perspective on this, because this is something we've never experienced before.
Well, we haven't, and it just goes to show that, one, everything is political now, whereas before there were certain areas of life that weren't. Two, there's nothing sacred, and there's no precedent, long-term precedent, that won't be broken to achieve a short-term political gain. And third, I believe this is a major distraction from some of the things going on with the current president and things going on in our country right now.
I think that last point you just brought up about a distraction, I could not agree with you more. I mean, look, it's been really interesting, folks, to see people on our side of the aisle get asked questions by the mainstream media. And frankly, as we always tell you on this show, we're going to cut through the propaganda. I got to tell you something, Richard. When I see our guys talking, folks, you're not going to like this answer, but they're really not defending the former president. They're really attacking the system, which is a valid point, because when you compare things that Hillary Clinton did to what Donald Trump is charged with now, there is not an equal scale of justice. But Richard, I am not hearing a lot of people, other than a couple people in the House of Representatives, the Jim Jordans and the Byron Donalds, really come to a full-throated defense of the former president.
Well, that's true. And he does not help himself when he attacks people who can help him. And it gives them less motivation to help him. But the thing I think we have to remember is Donald Trump is not the only person they'll attack. If Trump were to pull out of the race tomorrow or pass away or go to jail or whatever, whoever the next person up would be as the leading Republican would face the same withering fire. And I think we can look back through our entire lives, and it's happened this way before. It's just that people didn't stand up to it as much as he has. I can remember being a young child in the 50s, and my first impression of President Eisenhower was thinking he was lazy and all he liked to do was put golf balls down the aisle of his plane. Now, where did a little kid get an idea like that? It was from adults, from some propaganda machine. And so Republicans have been attacked for many, many years, and they will continue to be, whether it's President Trump or whoever his successors are.
Richard, I characterize this as what they're doing to Trump, I think, is wrong. I believe, from the government's point of view, they're making the case, hey, we tried over and over and over again given him plenty of leeway to get these documents back, everything from even issuing a subpoena. We couldn't get it out of him. Okay, I mean, that seems like the crux of the case here, but I think it's more than that. I mean, I really believe this didn't happen by accident. Yes, did Trump do some things here that he shouldn't have done? Yeah, he did, okay? I mean, this is what I deem to be a self-inflicted wound. Could Trump have returned those documents? He probably could have. Was it necessary to send the SWAT team in an Armageddon down to Mar-a-Lago? Probably not. But we are where we are right now. And this guy, Jack Smith, Richard, who is the prosecuting attorney, this guy is no Alvin Bragg. I mean, that case in New York is a garbage case, purely political. This guy, Jack Smith, is not pulling any punches here. And I sort of listening to some legal experts who I respect, people like the Andy McCarthy's, I can name others. This is some pretty serious stuff that the president's facing right now.
Well, I think it's serious, but let's look at it from a different angle. Let's say that he would have given everything back. You could say that potentially they could go through the same process and still indict him, even if he would have complied and given the things back. Because I think that they wanted that as a legal and a political weapon to use, and they were going to use it regardless of how he responded. I don't like some of the things he may have done that makes it look bad for him, but I don't know if that would have changed how they would have gone after him, especially considering the political implications and what this is distracting the media and the public from focusing on right now. And to me, I always look back, if you remember the movie Wag the Dog years ago,
yeah,
and I went back and rewatched it some months back. And so right now I look at everything through the prism of Wag the Dog. And I think that the current administration is deathly afraid something will happen to the president or the vice president every day. And every day they're in a panic mode, trying to figure out what they can do to distract people from what's really going on. And when I look at it that way, it's much easier for me to understand kind of what the motivation I believe they're doing is.
I concur with what you're saying there. And again, I'm not trying to give former President Trump a pass here. And I think your point is well taken. If they're out to, it's like Stalin's former KGB chief. His name, I can't get it right now, but he said, "You show me the man, I'll show you the crime." Okay, and look, it almost eerily seems to me that that's what we're going through here. I mean, was it wrong for him to have those documents? Probably. Should he have turned them back in? Likely. Should he have deflected? Deflected's a kind word to say. Should he have misdirected? Again, this case is going to be going to trial probably in 2024. But again, without sort of saying who's right and who's wrong, and we have a presumption of innocence here, and this is going to be a difficult case to prove. I'm not sure what the standard is on this case. Does it have to be unanimous or a majority or 2/3? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. But in this, quote, scaldron of hot water that the former president's in, the distraction is all of this stuff is starting to come out now about our current president, Joe Biden, and a $5 to $10 million grift. And Richard, say what you want, but everything I'm seeing leads me to believe the FBI not only is stonewalling this thing, but actively wanted to bury the story.
Well, and here's the thing that troubles me most, and it should trouble every citizen, and that is one of the bulwarks of our republic, and it's written above the columns at the Supreme Court, is equal justice under law.
Right.
And the reason that's so unique is England and Great Britain did not have equal justice under law. If you were a baron or a knight or a duke or a prince or things like that, you had different levels of justice for you based on your hierarchy in the royalty. And so equal justice under law was a unique principle for a self-governing free people. And if we do not have that, then each citizen has to be afraid in their town, county, state, and the federal government of being abused by the government if they don't do what the government wants them to do.
That's a prevailing thought, and I agree with you 100%. I mean, we have a situation here where a lot of the data that Representative Comer from Kentucky was able to get out of Director Wray, who heads the FBI, is only because he had the subpoena power. Had Republicans not taken back the House of Representatives in the last election, none of this would be happening. I mean, that's the frightening thing about it. We are only learning about the details of this paper, and news that came out, I guess, yesterday. Senator Grassley of Iowa basically stated that there's potentially 14 phone calls with Hunter Biden that have been recorded and 2 with President Joe Biden. And again, I think Representative Comer's done the right thing, Richard. He's followed the money in this case. And we have a situation, think about it right now. In the Republican primary, Donald Trump is up 30 points. In the Democratic, quote, race, if you ever had one, Joe Biden's currently up 43. Now, folks, you might say, Joe Biden up 43, who's he running against? Well, we've talked about Robert Kennedy, Marianne Williamson. The fact that he's up, Kennedy's got it in the 20 percentile range should be concerning, but not fearful. But anyhow, point being is, we look like we may have a redo of the last election. But Richard, you and I know this. 17 months out, a lot can change. And the Democratic Party may have overplayed their hand here because, we know they want to run against Trump. No doubt about it. And they do not want to run against, quote, any other Republican because they feel they can beat Trump. Why do they feel that way? They look at the poll numbers and they see what independent voters are saying. But you know what? It's funny, Richard. Things can change over 17 months. We never had President Fred Thompson. We never had President Rudy Giuliani. We never had President John Edwards. So 17 months out, Richard, when you talk about the distractions and then you talk about all the moving pieces that could be happening, and I say, who's pulling the strings here and who's pulling it on whom?
Well, yes, and you're totally right about the House Oversight Committee and what they're unveiling right now, and that's a variable that I think is a wild card that the administration is going to be trying to control. I can imagine they're burning the phone lines up to the Ukraine right now, trying to control that particular person. And if you listen back to Vice President then Biden threatened them about their $1 billion gift from the U.S. if they didn't fire the prosecutor. That he's putting pressure on that end of the deal. What I'm encouraged by is here just in the last few days, we're starting to see other Republicans in Congress stand up to the mainstream media. And to me, that's essential because every day I'll look at mainstream media to see what they're focusing on. And half the population is totally unaware of a lot of these things because they have not received that news. Yeah. And they limit their news sources. And so they do not know about it. So when we talk to them and bring up something, they think we're crazy because they've not seen it on their news.
Right.
And if we can get Republicans pushing back on those mainstream people and put some facts on the table that are irrefutable and they must cover, then the sky's the limit as far as how far this thing can blow the lid off.
Where do you see the Biden investigation through Comer's office going right now? I mean, we've learned that there is a special prosecutor in Delaware looking at this. But you know what, Richard? That happened years ago. The FBI's had the information. It makes me question, well, are they just trying to bury it? Are they sitting on it? I mean, from what we're hearing, Director Wray redacted certain pieces of that document that members of the Oversight Committee were able to see. What happens next?
Well, the mainstream media is going to cover for the administration, as we just mentioned.
Yeah.
And then you're also going to get the bureaucracy or the swamp, however you want to state it, they're going to cover as well. And to me, the catalyst for change will be if people in the Democrat Party sense that they can't win with Biden or Harris, then they will throw both of them over the side in one way or another to get someone on the ticket they think can win.
Any, and again, I don't like to talk conspiracy theories, but I am going to throw this out to you. And I think you're 100% right there. Because right now, and I've talked about this on other shows, if you look at a head-to-head matchup between President Biden and former President Trump, they're running neck and neck. I mean, Richard, it's 45, 46, 47, 40, 1 or 2 points well within the margin of error if you run Joe Biden against Governor Ron DeSantis. Same numbers, a point or two difference, 17 months out, Richard. I mean, that when you're within the margin of error and you're a sitting president with a 42% approval rating, a 56, 57 disapproval, 40% of your own party doesn't want to see you run, and 78% of the country, that's a lot of independents, Republicans, and Democrats, think the country's moving in the wrong direction. If those poll numbers start to deteriorate, it would not shock me at all to see the Democratic Party venture beyond Biden-Harris. And where I'm going with this, do you think it's any coincidence that our governor here in California was on Sean Hannity last night in what looked like a pretty relaxed environment? I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to politics.
No, and to this point, I've been wrong on my long-held theory for the last year and a half or so that I've thought that there'd be something similar to what happened in 1974 to 76, and that I thought they'd find a way to get rid of the vice president, and then they would replace her with whoever they wanted to run as an incumbent in 2024, and then they would find a reason to get rid of the president, and that they could that way run an incumbent like Gerald Ford ran after Nixon and Agnew left.
Right.
But to this point, that has not happened, but I still think it's possible.
Well, the only problem with that theory is that Vice President Kamala Harris, she's less popular than Joe Biden. So I don't know.
That's why I think that they could get rid of her first, replace her with someone like Newsom or someone else. Then you get rid of the president, and that vice president moves into the presidency like Gerald Ford did,
yeah.
And you have an incumbent running. So that to me is a possibility, but as I say, to this point, I'm wrong.
All right, let's go back to Trump for a minute here, because we're not. You and I are not experts on the Democratic Party for sure. But let's talk about.
No one else is either.
I know. All right, but let's talk about this. And whether you like Trump, loathe him, or no one has neutral opinions on him, so I'm not going there. But regardless of your opinion on Donald Trump, Richard, he was 45 to 50% in most polls before all this legal stuff happened. He's now pushing 55 or higher in a lot of these polls. Ron DeSantis has gone slightly down from where he started the race. And again, folks, 17 months out, I don't want to codify anything. The others, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Tim Scott, they're sort of there, but they're not pushing above that 5% mark. Richard, what is going to be the condition of this party if Donald Trump is the nominee and this case is still pending? It is likely, despite Jack Smith's claim that he's going to push for a speedy trial, I would be surprised if this trial happened prior to 2024.
Well, of course, President Trump wants it earlier, and the legal system is going to want to drag it out so that that question mark is hanging over his head. So that's going to be the big question on there. To me, what encourages me is the people, everyday, ordinary people like President Trump. They'll put up with some of those things because they realize he is I'll use the term down home guy, even though he's from New York, but he's always been very personable with everyday people. And he's pro-American, not a globalist. He's not a politician. And most of the real people in the country, I think, are like I was brought up. You had the line that said, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you," and you knew to stay away from the government. And people went out of their way to avoid dealing with the government because they knew every time they did, they were abused by the government, regardless of what they were told. And so he is the champion of that. And to this point, I like Governor DeSantis also, but Trump has been a proven warrior for the everyday American. And that to me is a solid base that's almost impenetrable.
Well, the question you have to ask yourself is how many arrows can one man take? Okay, and I think that is a question that is going to have to be addressed. This isn't you got what I believe is a bogus case in New York. I would be shocked if that case goes anywhere. This one, there are parts of it that he's going to have to deal with and his legal team. But it's not the only one. He's got this potential case pending down in Georgia.
Yeah.
We don't know how that's going to come out, but we know it's pending. It hasn't gone away. We also know that Jack Smith is investigating January 6th and the events that happened there. So, folks, our point of bringing this up, Trump's legal issues are not confined to Alvin Bragg and Jack Smith on this documents case. He has some other things pending. Richard, one thing I noticed every time this happens, literally, the oxygen is sucked out of the room for other candidates. I mean, how is a Ron DeSantis, a Nikki Haley, a Tim Scott, even Chris Christie got in the race. Governor Burgum of North Dakota got in the race. Ramaswamy seems to be gaining a little bit. But I mean, how do these other candidates, other than the face-to-face meetings that happen in Iowa and New Hampshire, which are really, really important, how do they get the airtime?
Well, they don't. And on the other side of that, it helps President Biden campaign from the basement or do nothing because nobody's paying attention to him, what he's doing every day as president or campaigning, if all the news is focused on President Trump.
You and I both know this is going to be a Rose Garden strategy for Biden like none other we've ever seen. Heck, we use the term Rose Garden strategy. They might not let him in the Rose Garden.
Yeah. And just remember, too, the political consultants get commissions off of ad buys.
Yes.
And so what do they want? They want controversy. I think both sides, political consultants, get together and manufacture controversy so both sides can fundraise and buy ads and get commissions and get rich off of it, regardless of which side wins.
It's an age-old political statement that you just said, and it does seem to happen every 2/4 years. Okay, so yeah, it's really putting pressure on some of the other candidates. They really have to focus on on their local issues in Iowa, New Hampshire, meaning they're going to have to focus on the local media in those particular states. They're not going to get national media attention while this circus is going on right now. And again, there is an old saying, even bad publicity is good publicity, but I'm not certain this time because look, no one would want to be facing what former President Trump is facing. I don't care who you are and how stiff your spine is. Ultimately, no matter how wealthy Trump is, the government's got more money and resources than he does.
And there's another old saying that I'll lighten up a little bit, that he may be a son of a gun, but he's our son of a gun.
He's our son of a gun, too. All right, let me get off politics and let's talk let's tie in some things to the political piece. The inflation came down today, the report. It's now at 4% year over year. That's cut in half of where it was a year ago. The Federal Reserve is meeting right now. Most people on Wall Street expect a pause. No more interest rate increases this month. Maybe they'll analyze the data next month. It's not 100% conclusive, but that does appear to be where we are with a targeted Fed funds rate somewhere near 5%. Richard, I've studied economics a lot. I've been around the block. With 3.7% unemployment, interest rates have ticked up. Stock market's hitting 52-week highs in the NASDAQ, the Magnificent Seven, as they like to call them. But underneath that, there are some cracks starting to form. We've seen unemployment claims tick up, albeit we used to be creating 400,000 jobs a month. Now we're down in the 250 to 280 range. Richard, is there a chance that this economy could slow into 2024 and create what I'm sure the Biden people don't want to see, negative economic growth in an election year?
Well, and it's amazing. We had 2 quarters of negative economic growth previously when he first took office, and he refused to call that a recession. And so, even if we do that, they will not acknowledge a recession in an election year period. And then, of course, that assumes you have to trust the numbers to begin with. And the more things I see with what's going on, the less I trust almost everything that I see.
Yeah, you have to be skeptical. But I guess where I'm coming from, I'm looking at certain counter trend indicators. In other words, credit card debt is approaching $1 trillion. The unemployment rate, despite those jobs being created, did tick up to 3.7%. Come August, September, student loan payments have to resume unless the Supreme Court intervenes, which I do not think is going to happen. Okay, so, and you still have what I deem to be quantitative tightening. The Fed is draining some funds out of the system. So, Richard, some of these employment cost and pressures, they're still there. Some of those have to come out of the system too. So, again, folks, I've said on the show many times, you don't have recessions when you have unemployment under 4% and the economic activity that we're seeing, but there are cracks developing. And the Federal Reserve itself, their own forecast, folks, has said they expect a soft landing. So, how will that tie in politically with all the other stuff we've talked about if we do see a quarter or two of negative economic growth?
Well, and a couple of other things that I think will affect the economic situation more uniquely this time than previously is the U6 number, which is rarely reported, and that's the number of people who are unemployed and aren't looking, and that number still is not recovered from COVID. So we have a lot of people not in the workforce, and so when you say 3.7, that's to me not as true a number as it used to be with the lower U6 number. But then second, as we see 4, 5, 6 million illegal aliens thrown into the system and put on public assistance, that also is pressure on local governments and taxpayers all across the country as well. And that's a wild card expense that we're going to have for years and years to come.
Well, and it's going to be an influence on the labor market at the low end of the scale too, because look, the secret out of the bag, a lot of the illegal immigrants coming across, they're basically given a parking ticket and say show up in court in 18 months or 2 years or whenever. Most of them don't show up in court. So you have a system, like an underclass system built of cheap, readily available labor, and there's a tendency that it can be exploited. So, that's just sort of a reality where we are, and all the bleeding heart liberals that want to welcome them in, well, all of a sudden, not in my backyard. Wait a second. And the irony, Richard, is, you're in Texas, you're outside of Austin. You would feel the effect really more than anything. I know you're not next to the border, but the whole state of Texas, which is getting assistance from National Guard from about half a dozen Republican governors.
Yes.
Richard, tell our viewers and listeners what it's like on the ground in Texas. What are you seeing? Because we're still having an abnormal amount coming across that border.
Well, and first thing I want to make sure to emphasize, and I've said this for 2 years, this surge, this invasion we have right now is not an accident.
Right.
The federal government is not only purposefully allowing this to happen, I believe that the federal government is paying for most of this to happen on both sides of the border. And a couple of examples. If you look at vera.org, that's a legal group whose normal mission is to help get people out of prison. And they last year got a $158 million contract from the U.S. government to help illegal aliens avoid deportation. And then you look at the NGOs, non-government organizations, and you can go online and do a search on your search engine, and they are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars also. And all of these caravans that come up have American representatives from these NGOs that are escorting and helping them financially to get to the American border and across. And so there are financial links there that I wish the media would investigate and expose. Yes, I don't live on the border currently. I was married to a lady for 20 years. from Laredo, so I've been across that border many, many times. Been across from El Paso to Brownsville many times, personally and on business. And Texas border is 1,254 miles long. That's almost Miami to Boston. And so it's a very difficult stretch to enforce. And we have wall. Last week, they released the first time they're going to put a buoy type system out on the river as a deterrence for coming across. Our National Guard, and we've spent in the billions of dollars to defend the border. The U.S. government's not helping with. We're deporting people in addition to busing them to northern cities, if you will. And I'm very grateful these other states are helping. And I see an opportunity here, if enough states band together, that they could also push back and rebalance the balance of power between states and the federal government that since 1913 has gone almost one way toward the federal government.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I'm glad as a Texan, you're seeing the help that's coming from some of these red state governors, and that is important for Governor Greg Abbott, because I know he's doing everything he can to abate this problem. But Richard, that issue in itself would overwhelm even a great state like Texas, because it's really a federal government problem. And I agree with you. They're not only not doing anything, they're encouraging it. And then you get these loudmouth Democrats saying, well, the problem's Republicans. Well, it is not a Republican problem. When Trump was president, crossings had slowed to a trickle compared to what's happening right now. So no, it's not. But what they're trying to do, I view it like this. They're trying to flood the zone and force Congress to act. You and I both know there is sub-zero chance Congress is going to do something on immigration. I mean, that's just not going to happen. I mean, no shot, no way, no how. So the Democratic Party is going to continue doing what they're doing until they get enough backlash, maybe from their own party, to stop this nonsense.
Yes, it's going to take Democrat politicians, and we can be as compassionate as we want to be. But think of it like your house. And how many people can you have come into your house before you can't afford to take care of them?
Yeah.
And that's the way our country is right now. They did a survey in South America last year, and the extrapolated number of the people who wanted to come to the United States was 93 million.
Wow.
And people are coming from over 160 countries around the world right now. We cannot take everybody.
Right.
And so if we don't stop this, they will overwhelm the system, and it will ruin the country financially at minimum. But there's also health and national security risk as well.
And we haven't even mentioned the crime and the drugs going across that border down there. I mean, it's just staggering. Let me talk about two other things. We had a couple minutes left, and then I want you to talk a little bit about what we chatted about before the show. Look, there was big news today out of Ukraine. A top-ranking Russian general has been killed. Look, I'm really unsure what's happening over there, because the news is, it's hard to gather what's fact versus fiction. One day you hear Ukraine's doing really well. They've launched a counteroffensive. Next thing you know, you hear the Russians, are able to do X, Y, and Z. It seems to me, Richard, that again, this has been going on now since February of 2022, when Russia launched its illegal invasion. Politically and economically and militarily wise, how do you see this playing out, given the current almost stalemate type situation we have?
Well, that's a good question. And I am no fan of Putin or Russia. And under ordinary circumstances, want the Ukraine to win. But there's only one known fact right now, and that is we're printing money and borrowing it as fast as we can, giving them a blank check to spend it however they want to, with very little accountability. And there is no telling the amount of money that's being siphoned off for people over there and politically over here to affect our system. And that, to me, is the big question mark. We don't have accurate information. We're just told to trust the administration as they send hundreds of billions of dollars over there that's not accounted for. And the Democrats squealed when President Trump asked for $5 billion to finish the wall. And yet we've sent well north of $100 billion to the Ukraine with very little account of how it's been utilized.
Well, I could carry on too, but a lot of the resources that are coming from our defense system, the weapons systems, the ammunitions, the artillery, etc., and again, it's coming from other countries too. But one thing, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, this isn't a political issue, other than the fact that some of our stockpiles of reserves are being used in Ukraine, yes. And we ultimately have to replenish those. And again, I've been consistent on this show as an advocate to help fight the Russians because what they did is wrong. And again, NATO is supporting it. But we as Americans have to recognize that in addition to helping the Ukrainians fight off the Russians, it is depleting some of our stockpiles at a time when the Chinese are increasing, their military capabilities. That is a concern I have, Richard.
Well, absolutely. And President Trump, as he did with NATO, got them to put more money in. And to this point, Europe and some of those other countries don't have to do as much because they say, well, heck, the United States will write a check and take care of it.
Well, at least we're seeing them do something because the British, yes. The French, the Norwegians, a lot of people, the Poles, I don't want to leave anybody out, they have stepped up here, and helped. But that's a tough situation. And again, look at what we're dealing with here. We have an 80-year-old president dealing with this in the midst of a potential corruption issue related to Ukraine, maybe China, we don't know. Again, we don't spread false facts on this show, folks. We try to cut through the propaganda, but there's a lot of unanswered questions out there.
Yes,
hey,
absolutely.
Richard, close it out with this, and I want you've just released a new book, okay? And I talked a little bit about before the show. Share with our viewers and listeners, because you are a prolific author, about the genesis of the current book that you wrote.
Well, this is book number 10. It's called The Unopened Present. And when my son years ago was 6 months old, I was concerned that I might pass away before I would teach him the important lessons in life. So I wrote him a letter and enumerated 43 important principles. Unfortunately, he died 3 months later. Wow. And I wrote a book called Surviving Grief by God's Grace about that loss and my recovery from it, put the letter as an appendix. Well, last year I was doing a Father's Day 4-minute radio interview in Iowa, and I won't go through all the detail, but there's a chapter in here about it. And I got a call. I did it from a car dealership because my car was in getting service, and I got a phone call as I was leaving. Long story short, a guy who was calling me asked if I was the person on the phone. I said yes, and he said, I want you to know I prayed to God last night to send somebody to say something that could help me because I lost a daughter 2 months ago. Wow. And I believe he sent you today to help me. He didn't realize I was doing a radio interview. The people in Iowa didn't realize there was a person in Texas who benefited from that 4-minute interview and all the things that had to come together to make that happen, which I write about a little bit in this book. But I've put this together, and I think it's a great Father's Day gift. It's a gift to help people think beyond making a living each week. How do I want to raise my kids? What values do I want to instill in them so that they can be good citizens and pass that along to their children and grandchildren in the future as well? And so to me, this is a very personal work, and I've had some tremendous endorsements, including Ann Graham Lotz, Billy Graham's daughter, and others who've just been very complimentary about how this can help families.
Well, Richard, that is a touching story, and I wish you nothing but the best on the success of your book. And I want to thank you again for coming back on Schaftlein Report today. We always have insightful, interesting discussions, and it's great to get your perspective coming out of the great state of Texas. Thank you for being my guest today.
My pleasure. God bless America.
God bless America. Okay, that's it for today, folks. We'll be back in a couple days. We'll cut through the propaganda. Stay safe, secure. See you on Thursday.